The water of Lake Nemi was not always dark. It was once a mirror for the heavens, a cool, quiet place where citizens of Rome sought peace. But on the night of the 31st of July, 39 AD, the lake held no peace at all. It was stained with the color of spoiled wine and the sound of broken promises. The monstrous hulls of the emperor's two great pleasure barges, his floating palaces, cut through the stillness, their gilded prows casting twin shadows that looked like a vulture's wings. These ships were not vessels of state. They were cages of marble and bronze, designed for an emperor whose desires had long outgrown the boundaries of the earth and the laws of the gods. Inside, where silk was slippery and jewels cast a dizzying light, the true nature of the palace was revealed. The air was thick and sweet, with imported incense, with expensive perfume, and with a fear so profound it made the throat ache. It was here, amidst the laughter and the cruelty, that a young man named Eutychus learned the most chilling truth about power. A man can own the world, but he will still crave what he cannot buy. Tonight, the Emperor Caius Caligula was not just drinking wine. He was drinking lives. And when the emperor raised his cup, every man in Rome knew that someone, somewhere, had just lost everything. The silence after his laughter was the deepest terror of all. Make sure to watch the video all the way till the end. I promise you're going to find it super informative. We put a lot of hard work into bringing you this content, so don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give the video a like, and share it with your friends. Your support helps the channel grow and motivates us to keep creating even better videos for you. The night pressed in on Eutychus, damp and heavy with the scent of pine and privilege. He was a boy barely 18 years old, though the 3 years he had spent serving the monstrous household of Caius Caligula had aged him with the swiftness of desert sun on fruit. His youth was now just a thin, brittle shell around a core of deep, exhausted dread. His uniform was a tunic of pure white linen, spotless and unforgiving, and around his neck, he wore a collar of thin, polished silver, a badge of his trade as a cupbearer. This was a position of great intimacy and high danger. He stood near the emperor's couch, close enough to hear the terrible whispers and witness the casual brutality. Yet insignificant enough, he hoped to remain invisible. Tonight, Eutychus was aboard the largest of the Nemi ships, a floating temple of debauchery that historians would later call a palace. The walls were inlaid with precious stones. The floors were mosaics depicting scenes that could never be spoken in a decent Roman home, and the wine, the Phalerian Eutychus poured, was older than Eutychus himself. His focus had to be absolute. A spill, a misstep, a moment of hesitation in fetching the next indulgence, and the cost could be his life, or worse, the life of a fellow slave. Caligula lay draped across a purple cushion, a figure of staggering excess. His heavy gold rings caught the lamplight. He was speaking, a long, slurred monologue about his own divinity, punctuated by bursts of laughter that sounded less like human joy and more like the ripping of silk. "And tell me, Eutychus?" Caligula suddenly boomed, turning his cruel, dark eyes directly onto the boy. Eutychus froze, the wine decanter poised mid-air. "What do you think of beauty? Do you think it is something fixed? A statue of Venus, perhaps? Or is it something fleeting? Something that belongs to the moment and to the one who claims the moment?" The room went instantly quiet. Every Roman senator, every nervous courtier, every slave nearby held their breath. To answer the emperor truthfully was dangerous. To lie was equally so. Eutychus lowered the decanter slowly, his hands sweating. "Master," Eutychus began, his voice surprisingly steady, a lesson learned through harsh practice. "I believe that beauty, like a precious bloom, is only truly owned by the one who has the power to protect it, or the power to pluck it." A slow, Reptilian smile spread across Caligula's face. He slammed his fist down on the cushion, sending a ripple through the wine in his golden cup. Protect it or pluck it. Excellent, my young cupbearer, a philosopher in a white tunic. You see, gentlemen, this boy understands the nature of possession better than all your learned tutors. He didn't praise Eutychus out of kindness. He praised him to remind everyone that Eutychus, too, was an object, a possession that could be protected or plucked at the emperor's whim. Eutychus knew this. He was a piece of gilded furniture in a golden cage, and the only way to survive was to remain a piece of furniture, silent, useful, and without a soul the emperor might take interest in. Eutychus refilled the emperor's cup, the image of his own sister, left behind in the distant countryside, flashing briefly behind his eyes. He had to survive for her. He had to be invisible because visibility in Caligula's court meant a swift and horrific end. The emperor's obsession with power went beyond territory and legions. It was a hungry, personal violation of everything holy, and Eutychus was about to witness its most perverted expression tonight. The air in the golden cage was getting colder, and Eutychus could feel a sickening twist in his gut, a premonition that the plucking was about to begin. The emperor wasn't done talking about beauty and ownership, not by a long, chilling shot. The true purpose of the lavish gathering was soon revealed, and it had nothing to do with senatorial duties or military strategy. Tonight was a celebration of two marriages, one already completed and one about to be utterly destroyed. Senator Gaspo, a man whose family lineage stretched back to the founding of the Republic, stood nervously by the edge of the mosaic floor, dressed in the formal white toga of a groom. Beside him stood Livia Orestilla, his new wife. Livia was young, no older than 20, and possessed a pale, classical beauty that seemed to glow tragically under the harsh torchlight. She looked less like a bride celebrating her union and more like a sacrificial lamb being offered on an altar of state. Her eyes, wide and fixed, never left the emperor. Caligula had personally insisted on attending the wedding ceremony earlier that day. This was considered a great honor, a sign of the emperor's favor toward Gaspo's powerful family. But Eutychus, watching from his silent post behind the emperor's dining couch, knew that Caligula's favor was often a prelude to disaster. As Eutychus poured a new flask of Chian wine for the tyrant, Caligula raised his hand, silencing the cheerful, if forced, music of the lyres and flutes. The sudden quiet was heavy enough to crush bone. "My dear Gaspo," Caligula purred, his voice dripping with false kindness, "you have a treasure beside you, Livia Orestilla, a name that sounds like the very essence of Rome's noble women. I congratulate you on capturing such a prize." Gaspo bowed low, his face tight with forced gratitude. "Your benevolence is overwhelming, master. May the gods bless your reign and this union." Caligula laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "Blessings are cheap, Gaspo. Power is expensive. Tell me, old friend, how can I, your emperor and protector, possibly improve upon this already perfect evening?" Gaspo swallowed hard, sensing the trap. "Master, your mere presence is enough. We only ask for your continued favor." Caligula sat up, dismissing his attendants with a sharp flick of his wrist. He fixed Livia Orestilla with a predatory gaze, scanning her from the jeweled coronet in her hair to the delicate silver sandals on her feet. The look was not one of admiration, but of assessment, the cold calculation of a man measuring an object's worth. "I have decided how to improve it," Caligula announced, his voice suddenly sharp and commanding. He pointed a jeweled finger at the trembling Senator Gaspo. "Gaspo, you are dismissed. Leave your wife here." The silence that followed was absolute. Gaspo's mouth dropped open, and the color drained instantly from his face. leaving it the white of bleached bone. He looked at the emperor, then at Livia, and finally back at the emperor, a desperate plea for mercy rising in his throat. But before he could utter a sound, the emperor's expression shifted, morphing from cruel amusement into lethal fury. "I said dismissed, Senator," Caligula shrieked, his voice laced with the terrifying insanity Eutychus knew too well. "Are you deaf? I find myself suddenly struck by the beauty of this young woman, and I have decided that I shall consummate this marriage tonight. The jus prime noctis, the right of the first night, belongs to the emperor. Always. This was not law. It was pure, horrific invention. A demonstration that Caligula's will superseded every tradition, every law, and every personal bond in the empire." Eutychus watched in horror as two Praetorian guards instantly materialized, flanking Senator Gaspo and pulling him roughly toward the exit. Livia Orestilla cried out, a small, choked sound of pure terror, but the senator was gone, dragged away into the damp night. His marriage shattered before the evening meal was even served. Eutychus had seen much horror in the palace, but this casual, public obliteration of a man's honor and a woman's life was particularly sickening. Caligula simply beckoned Livia Orestilla toward his couch with a languid wave of his hand, his eyes burning with triumphant perversion. The musicians, terrified, dared to strike up a cheerful tune again, trying desperately to drown out the sound of a young woman's tears and the chilling realization that Rome itself was now just a toy in the hands of a monster. Eutychus kept pouring the wine, his hand shaking, feeling the cold weight of his silver collar press against his throat. He was a witness to an atrocity that would echo in Rome for centuries. The night wore on, fueled by Caligula's endless supply of wine and his unquenchable thirst for domination. Eutychus, tasked with tending the emperor's personal drinking bowl, a massive, ornately carved piece of obsidian, stood like a pillar of stone, his mind numb but his senses hyper-alert. The opulent room was now silent save for the emperor's voice, which had lowered to a thick, possessive murmur as he spoke to the terrified Livia Orestilla. Caligula seemed to relish her distress, finding her fear a delightful seasoning for his power. He spoke not of love or even desire, but of his ownership. He reminded her in chilling detail that her life, her body, and her future now belonged not to her husband, not to her family, but to the divine emperor. Then, just before dawn, Caligula made his next, shocking announcement. He stood, steadying himself with a hand on Eutychus's shoulder, a touch that felt like a brand of hot iron. "Attention, friends! Attention, witnesses!" he bellowed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling of the floating palace. "I have enjoyed the novelty of this woman. She is, as I suspected, a masterpiece of the state, a piece of art that belongs rightly in the imperial collection." He paused, scanning the faces of his frozen guests, searching for any flicker of dissent. "Therefore, Livia Orestilla is no longer the wife of the pathetic Gaspo. She is my wife. She is now Empress of Rome." The shock in the room was palpable. Eutychus nearly dropped the obsidian bowl. To take a bride on her wedding night was an appalling abuse of power. To then marry her, forcing a quick, illegal divorce upon the senator, was an act of tyrannical madness that challenged the very foundations of Roman law. But Caligula did not stop there. He enjoyed the power of the proclamation for perhaps an hour. Livia, pale and catatonic, was dressed in the robes of an empress, a terrifying mockery of her bridal gown. But as the first streaks of sickly gray light appeared over the hills bordering Lake Nemi, the emperor tired of his new toy. "Bring me my robes," Caligula shouted, dismissing his guards and servants with impatient gestures. "This is tedious. She is far too quiet. I prefer women with more fire, more spirit." This one is simply damp." He pointed at Livia, who still stood frozen in her empress robes. "Eutychus, summon my secretary. Write this down. The Emperor Caius Caligula finds this marriage to be utterly unsatisfactory. Livia Orestilla is now divorced from me and from Gaspo and banished from Rome. Send her to the furthest, coldest corner of the empire. I want her gone before the sun reaches its height." Just like that, Livia Orestilla's entire existence was dissolved. In less than 12 hours, she had been a maiden, a wife, a violated victim, an empress, a divorcee, and now a banished exile. Her whole world, built on generations of Roman tradition and stability, had been utterly wiped away by the capricious whim of one deranged man. Eutychus watched as the guards, now devoid of the respect they had shown moments earlier to the newly crowned empress, roughly seized the woman. Her expensive robes were already crumpled, her hair undone, her face streaked with silent tears. As she was dragged away, her eyes met Eutychus's for a fleeting second. In that brief moment, the boy saw not the terror of a princess, but the blank, devastating shock of a soul that had been extinguished. He wanted to reach out, to offer a word of comfort, but the cold weight of his silver collar and the watchful eyes of the Praetorians kept him perfectly still. He poured more wine into Caligula's cup, washing down the evidence of a life that had just been brutally consumed. Caligula, now bored with his own creation, began loudly discussing the design of his next floating galley, oblivious to the human wreckage he had just left behind. Eutychus was accustomed to the monstrous spectacles of Caligula's court, but the case of Livia Orestilla had left a raw, throbbing wound in his emotional armor. It wasn't the violation itself that was so unique. It was the swift, brutal cycle, the claiming, the consummation, the cancellation. Caligula treated people not as subjects or even as enemies, but as seasonal fruit, enjoyed for a moment, then tossed aside to rot. Days later, the court had moved back to the formal, oppressive grandeur of the Palatine Hill in Rome. Eutychus continued his duties, moving through the marbled halls like a shadow, watching. He noticed a subtle, sickening pattern to the emperor's cruelty, especially concerning marriage. It wasn't just about sex. It was about status. By taking and discarding the wives of the most powerful men in Rome, Caligula publicly neutered their husbands, proving that their wealth, their titles, and their lineage meant nothing against his absolute desire. The whispers in the private dining rooms, where Eutychus was often present, were full of fear. Senators spoke in low, frightened tones about the next marriage Caligula might decide to ruin. Every powerful family with an eligible daughter or a newly married son was now living under a cloak of dread. Their daughters were not assets. They were potential targets, and their beauty was a liability. Then came the new focus of Caligula's destructive attention, Lollia Paulina. Lollia was known throughout Rome not just for her staggering beauty, but for the immense wealth of her family. Her current husband was Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, a respected military commander and a man Caligula initially claimed to admire. Eutychus remembered the day Caligula first saw her. It was at a state dinner months before the Nemi incident. Lollia Paulina was wearing a gown sewn with pearls and diamonds, a visible declaration of her family's prestige. Caligula had not smiled. He had merely stared, his gaze heavy and possessive, like a land surveyor marking a territory for seizure. Now, the emperor was restless, bored with the quiet efficiency of his administration. He needed a new scandal, a new demonstration of his power to upend the natural order of Rome. One evening, while Caligula was entertaining his Praetorian prefects, Eutychus overheard the emperor's cruel decision, spoken with the same casualness one would use to order a change of menu. "Lepidus's wife," Caligula muttered, swirling wine in his cup. "Lollia Paulina. She is too grand to be owned by a mere soldier. Tell him to divorce her. Immediately, one prefect, bolder than the rest, dared to cough politely. Master, Lepidus is a loyal man, and the marriage is well established. To seize her now, it might stir too much dissent. Caligula turned his eyes, cold and hard as winter ice, onto the prefect. Dissent? The only dissent I tolerate is the sound of my own displeasure. Her husband is irrelevant. I want her wealth and I want her beauty, and I will have them both. Bring her to me, tonight. Eutychus felt a sickening sense of déjà vu. The routine was the same, the victim was different, but the outcome was guaranteed. Devastation. The story of Livia Orestilla was repeating itself. Only this time, the stakes were higher, involving one of the wealthiest women in the empire. Eutychus retreated into the shadows, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He knew, with dreadful certainty, that Caligula was constructing a personal history of violence, building his reign on a pile of broken wedding vows and shattered lives. The empire was merely a backdrop for his individual perverse desires. The seizure of Lolia Paulina was even swifter and more brutal than the violation of Livia Orestilla. Unlike Gaspo, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus offered no resistance, knowing full well that any refusal would mean his swift execution and the annihilation of his family line. Lolia Paulina, already deeply connected to the power structures of Rome, was brought to the Palatine not in tears of hysteria, but in a state of icy, aristocratic resignation. She knew the game and she knew she had lost. Caligula married her almost instantly, making her the third woman he had elevated to the rank of empress in a matter of months. Lolia wore her status like a suit of heavy armor, her expression remote and carefully controlled. Eutychus observed that she did not try to charm the emperor, nor did she weep. She simply existed, a living trophy adorning Caligula's victory over decency and law. For a few weeks, Lolia Paulina seemed to hold a flicker of Caligula's attention. He delighted in displaying her incredible jewels and her legendary beauty to foreign dignitaries. She was his most expensive acquisition yet. But Caligula's interest was always predicated on novelty and ownership, and once ownership was established, the thrill vanished. The very perfection that had drawn him to her soon became a source of profound boredom. Eutychus, serving a private breakfast one morning, witnessed the beginning of the end. Caligula was picking at some grapes, his eyes cold and empty as he looked across the table at his new empress. "Lolia," he said, pushing the plate away with a loud clatter. "Tell me, are your eyes truly as magnificent as people say? Or is it merely the light that gives them that unnatural sparkle?" Lolia Paulina, maintaining her composure, answered stiffly, "Master, they are merely my eyes. If they please you, I am fortunate." Caligula laughed, a short, ugly sound. "They do not please me anymore. They are flat, like a worn coin. Tell me, do you have any distinguishing marks? Something unique? Something that makes you yours and not just another woman of good breeding?" The question was not a compliment. It was a demand for evidence of her worth. Lolia hesitated for a fraction of a second, then calmly unpinned a brooch from her shoulder. With a slight movement, she revealed a small, raised birthmark on the skin just above her collarbone. "It is a scar, master, from a childhood fall." Caligula leaned forward, peering at the tiny imperfection. He seemed utterly disgusted. "A scar? So you are flawed then? All that beauty, and you are marred." He sat back, his disappointment clearly visible. "This is tiresome. You are simply a woman, not a goddess. I bought an expectation, and I received only a reality. That was all it took." The emperor's fleeting attention was extinguished. Within the week, Lolia Paulina received the same horrific decree as Livia Orestilla: divorce and banishment. But Caligula added a final, vicious twist, a layer of gratuitous cruelty that Eutychus found truly sickening. He did not simply send Lolia away. He seized the vast wealth that had been hers, declaring it forfeit to the imperial treasury, thereby leaving her stripped of both status and security. She was banished not merely as a failed wife, but as a pauper, a public symbol of the catastrophic danger of attracting the emperor's gaze. Eutychus watched Lolia Paulina leave the palace, not with the stunned terror of Livia, but with an immense, hollow dignity. She was escorted by guards, her back straight, her expensive robes now the simple clothing of a woman who had lost everything. The sight confirmed a terrible truth for Eutychus. Power in Rome was no longer about governance or glory. It was about the thrill of seizing someone else's life and then casting the broken remnants onto the dust heap. He served a man who was incapable of possession, only destruction. The banishments of Livia Orestilla and Lolia Paulina were not just personal tragedies. They were tremors that shook the entire Roman elite. The pattern was now undeniable and terrifying. Any man's wife could be taken, ruined, and discarded, and the greater her family's wealth or power, the greater the attraction for Caligula's destructive ego. Eutychus noticed the change in the atmosphere. The fear was no longer just the immediate terror of being executed. It was the slow, corrosive fear of utter helplessness. Powerful senators, who commanded legions and governed provinces, felt emasculated and humiliated. Their honor, which was everything to a Roman noble, had been repeatedly violated by a tyrant who mocked the sanctity of marriage and family. Eutychus, still positioned by the emperor's side, became a silent repository of these growing resentments. He learned to read the shifts in the room, the way the Praetorian prefects would exchange quick, dark glances when Caligula spoke of his divine right to violate any woman, or how the older senators would grip their wine cups tightly until their knuckles were white whenever he mentioned a young bride. The air was now thick not just with perfume and fear, but with the palpable scent of conspiracy. The breaking point came with the execution of Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, Lolia Paulina's exiled husband. Though he had quietly submitted to Caligula's demands, Caligula, suspicious of his former general's passive obedience, had him arrested and killed on a trumped-up charge of treason. This confirmed the grim reality. Submission offered no safety. One dark, rainy evening, months after the Nemi incident, Eutychus was serving a late supper to a small, select group of men in a back chamber of the palace. Caligula was absent, occupied with his latest bizarre fixation, declaring war on the sea, according to the palace rumors. The group included Cassius Chaerea, a tribune of the Praetorian Guard whom Caligula constantly mocked for his perceived lack of masculinity, and several senators who had family ties to the women Caligula had ruined. As Eutychus poured the thick, red wine, he heard the words he had been expecting, a whisper of steel and resolve. "He is a pestilence," whispered one senator, his voice trembling not with fear, but with controlled rage. "He destroys our wives, he steals our sons, and he has killed a man who had already given him everything." Chaerea spoke then, his voice low and cutting. "He mocks me every day. He mocks Rome every day. He is not a man, he is a stain upon the purple robe. There is no solution but the knife." Eutychus, standing silently with the heavy wine amphora, absorbed every word. He knew that any acknowledgement, any glance in the wrong direction, would mean his death. But in that moment, Eutychus realized his invisibility was not just a tool for survival. It was a shield for the architects of change. He was the silent, unnoticed force in the room, the one who bore witness to the tyranny and now to the birth of justice. The conspiracy matured quickly, driven by the collective shame and terror Caligula had systematically imposed on the entire Roman hierarchy. On the 24th of January 41 AD, Eutychus was present in the theater when the deed was finally done. He saw the flicker of madness in Caligula's eyes as the emperor left the performance. He saw the sudden, chilling resolution on the face of Cassius Chaerea as he stepped forward with his cohorts in a dim, narrow passageway. And Eutychus heard the wet, sickening sound of the steel hitting flesh 19 times, as Rome finally struck back at the monster who had claimed every joy, every marriage, and every life as his own to take. When the chaos erupted, Eutychus dropped the tray he was carrying and fled into the roaring streets, no longer a slave of the pervert, but a witness to the end of a nightmare. He had seen the ultimate price of absolute power, the way it corrupted not only the soul of the man who wielded it, but the very sanctity of the lives he touched, from the lowliest slave cupbearer to the highest empress. The nightmare of the floating palaces and the broken vows was over, washed away by the rain and the blood on the Roman pavement. Eutychus never forgot the terror of serving the emperor's wine, or the final, terrible sound of the emperor paying the price for his perverted atrocities.